The U.S. and Russia hold high-stakes talks about the Ukraine-Russia war. So what did both nations agree on, and is a peace deal near? I'm Veronica Dudo. Let's find out.
This is In America Today from the Ticker News Studios in New York City.
High-level delegations from the United States and Russia held talks in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday over the fate of Ukraine. The State Department said the talks were aimed to discuss ending the three-year-long war, which began with Russia's full-scale invasion of its neighbor in 2022 and followed sustained cross-border aggression from Moscow since 2014. Addressing Ukrainian and European concerns, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said no one was being sidelined. He added that the European Union will be involved at some point, and any solution must be acceptable to all parties. For more, I'm joined by Harley Littman, a political analyst and foreign policy expert. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So first, let's begin with these high-stakes meeting that we saw between U.S. and Russian officials. It concluded after nearly 5 hours of discussions, with both sides agreeing to move forward with a Ukraine settlement process. What are your initial thoughts about the talks and this proposed settlement process?
Well, to start with, this is certainly extraordinary. This war between Russia and Ukraine has been going on, as you mentioned, for 3 years, with terrible casualties and devastation throughout, particularly Ukraine and some parts of Russia, but mostly Ukraine. With you combine all the lives lost, it's over 1 million lives. I mean, that's it just shows you the terrible carnage that's going on there. That said, the fact that Russia and the United States spoke for 4 or 5 hours on a peace deal is extremely encouraging for those who want to see a peace deal. I don't think the United States or Russia would invest that much time and energy if they weren't making meaningful progress. So I believe there will be a deal to end the war. The question is, what will that deal look like?
Now, of course, these talks were held in Saudi Arabia. What role do you think that country is playing in all of this?
Well, Saudi Arabia is a big power player today. They're respected among the leadership in the world, in diplomacy, in economic might, and in influence. They're a good place to host it because they also could be somewhat neutral. While they're clearly more in the American camp, they do have a relationship with Russia. And Saudi Arabia, with their huge economic wealth, could play a role that possibly could make a deal work. And that could spill over to creating peace in Gaza as well. So Saudi Arabia is going to play a very large role behind the scenes in future negotiations for Ukraine and certainly for Gaza.
Now, of course, ahead of these high-stakes talks, we can see here that video of the American Mark Fogel, who was released. This was from President Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East. This deal was secured. So this happened just days before these talks. Now, of course, the U.S. and Russia, they both agreed today to appoint special representatives to continue diplomatic efforts. How significant is this commitment?
Very, we're experiencing history being made as of the moment. This has been upending everything we've known about foreign policy vis-a-vis the United States and Russia, the United States and Europe, the Middle East. Everything is turned upside down. But as I said earlier, the whole question is, what is peace, if we could achieve it, going to look like? And I think this is the next question. So insofar as Ukraine and Russia, it looks like, given comments by the recent members that have been added to Trump's cabinet, like Pete Hegseth, has said it's unrealistic for Ukraine to think that they're going to get back the territory that is now being controlled by Russia, which is a huge jolt for Ukraine because Ukraine and its supporters has always said that this is sovereign Ukrainian territory taken by force from Russia, and where the people support Ukraine. Even though some would dispute that and say in the areas that Ukraine and Russia have been fighting, those regions in the eastern part of Ukraine tend to be a little more pro-Russian, where mid-Ukraine and western Ukraine are much more pro-West and certainly want Ukraine to be an independent nation. But you're going to have a truncated Ukraine, a smaller Ukraine. It looks like they're not going to be able to apply for NATO membership, which is, of course, a win for Putin. And you could argue, well, it's a win for peace. If Ukraine is able to keep its territorial integrity with the rest of what it's allowed to keep and be a true sovereign nation, it's debatable. Some will argue that's a win for Ukraine. They were about to be swallowed up by Russia. Others will say, you've weakened Ukraine so much, you've rewarded aggression. Russia attacked, Ukraine did nothing to provoke it, and now you're rewarding Russia to keep the territories they've conquered. This speaks to might makes right. And of course, we tend not to go along with that thinking. So most people think that if it's going to end this terrible war, it's probably worth it. Wars like this could go on, so you need to have closure. And this looks like the closure that we're going to see.
Now, Vice President J.D. Vance has been in Europe. He has been giving some speeches at different events. How do you think European allies and Ukraine might be involved in the negotiations moving forward, and potentially what concerns might they have?
They have huge concerns. They're in shock with the comments by Pete Hegseth and particularly J.D. Vance. He's turned the whole U.S. commitment to Europe, as I said earlier, upside down. For the last 3 decades, the United States has been in the forefront of defending Europe, defending its borders, its territorial integrity. Now, J.D. Vance is saying we're more interested in what goes on internally in Europe rather than externally. We're not focused on defending Europe's borders. So for critics of Vance, they're going to say, you're giving a green light to Russia, which wants to regain their old empire. And this is going to bring on a war, possibly a world war. The supporters of J.D. Vance are going to say that our perspectives have changed since the end of the Cold War. What we're concerned about is immigration into Europe, culture, freedom of speech, that Europe has allowed themselves to be nearly taken over by radical Islam, and that Europe is in danger of becoming Eurabia, as they call it. So this view holds that Europe has to be able to defend its culture and keep, in effect, the Christian culture that Europe has been known for, and not allow themselves to be swallowed up with massive Muslim migration. So that's really what the heart of this is. And it's a big shock for Europeans. Now, that all said, there is a solution to this. Europe has only spent 2% of its GDP on defense, which is a low number. The United States has basically borne the brunt of defending Europe. And the Americans feel that 80 years after World War II, we should not be bearing such a big burden. That Germany in particular and other countries have thrived economically precisely because they don't have to put a lot of money into defense. And after all, we in America cannot care more than the Europeans themselves about European freedom. So if they want to defend their borders from what they see as aggression from Russia, they need to increase the spending as a percentage of GDP for defense from 2% to 5%. Please, it will strain militaries in Europe, and Europe can support Ukraine, perhaps without the United States as one option. And it will deter Russia, because as a student of history, Rarely is an aggressive country encouraged to go to war when they see their neighbors are strong. If they see their neighbors are weak, they're going to pause or recalculate. So this is what's happening. And if you think of a comparison with Russia, Russia's spending 10% of its GDP on defense and 40% of its budget, which means it's on a war footing. And even if the war in Ukraine is resolved and there's peace, they may go after other countries in Europe.
Well, this story is certainly unfolding. We will continue to cover it. Harley Littman, thank you so much for all of your insights and analysis.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
This is Ticker. We'll be right back.